Lou, in late 2019, Garry Reid was investigated by the DOD's Inspector General's office regarding 4 separate complaints of him having sexual affairs with subordinate employees, sexual harassment, and creating a negative work environment. In addition to that, you, Lue Elizondo, accused Reid of malicious activities, coordinated disinformation, professional misconduct, whistleblower reprisal, and explicit threats. And you did this in May of 2021. And before I ask you my question, I need the audience to understand that Garry Reid was the head of all counterintelligence, law enforcement, and security for the totality of the Department of Defense worldwide. So if you were going to have a villain in your life, you probably would prefer someone with a little bit less power than this individual had. So Lue Elizondo, let me know like how his conduct, because after you left the Pentagon, he had a vendetta against you because you did not read him on to the ATIP program, and he discovered that when he found out about your resignation letter, I think maybe days after the December 16th, 2017 New York Times article. So how did his behavior impact you and your family's well-being and livelihood in life?
Wow. Okay, let me start by kind of maybe to capture all your questions. You've got a lot of really good questions, and there's a lot to discuss here. So let me kind of start, if I can, chronologically. Garry Reid was an individual, comes from the same world I do, which is special operations, asymmetric world when it comes to combat and warfare. He was a very effective command sergeant major in the special operations community, and he did a lot for his country. So let me start by saying I don't relish in anybody's demise. It's bittersweet. It's always sad when somebody who served their country at some point honorably winds up being, exposed. We're all human. I'm not saying that that's an excuse in Gary's position. He made my life miserable. I mean, it's no secret. We'll get into that. But let me start by saying I wish no ill will upon him. I hope he finds his peace. And there was a point in time when he really was a patriot, and something happened. I don't know what it was. I can only guess. A lot of things. There's an old saying: "Absolute power corrupts absolutely," and I suspect that may be the case here. But let me just again preface that early on in his career, he did a lot for his country. Then there was a time that I worked with him in the Pentagon. This was a man who, look, I'm no clinical psychologist, but there seemed to be these weird manic episodes when I was briefing him on one of my other portfolios that I managed. It was a very important portfolio, and he never seemed very interested. And the stakes were very high. If something messed up, it was very significant because it dealt with all I'll say is 9/11 and investigations that were involved in that. And he never seemed to be overly interested in it. It wasn't until I would bring, let's say, a female colleague in or my deputy to come in to be part of the briefing, and all of a sudden I'd notice he would perk up. And that was problematic for me because clearly, there was a clear indication in my mind and in others, obviously, that there was this preferential type treatment. Now, when I say preferential treatment, I don't mean just being nice. Inappropriate behavior, asking someone, hey, come sit next to me instead of sitting on the end of the table with everybody else. And at one point, I have to be very careful because I've been asked by the IG not to discuss specifics of the investigation involving sexual harassment, so I won't. But what I will say is that one of my direct subordinates was a victim of the sexual harassment allegations by Garry Reid. And so knowing that early on, I simply couldn't trust him. And so I was managing 2 portfolios at the time. The other portfolio was ATIP. And I never read him on. And I never read him on because I knew early on this was a guy who I couldn't trust. He had open IG investigations against him. So, of course, I'm not going to read him on. And you're right. It's a bit of a fox in the henhouse situation when you have the head of all of DOD, law enforcement, counterintelligence, and security worldwide, right? As your boss. It's problematic. It's a problem. Because military service is built upon trust, and if you don't have that trust at the very top, there's a problem. And, case in point, now I can talk a little bit what the IG said and what Garry Reid said and others. There's a point in the investigation that says, well, of all the times he kissed me and hugged me, I never thought it was inappropriate. Whoa, I'm sorry. I don't mean to make light of it, but wait a minute. You're telling me a government official to another government official, of all the times he's kissed you, first of all, the first time is inappropriate, let alone all the other times. And then there were some senior leadership quotes in there. I won't say who they were. Anybody can look it up. But this is his boss basically saying, yeah, it was kind of inappropriate, but he did other things really good. So I didn't really think it was a big deal. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Because someone does good in other areas, that type of behavior is unexcusable, period, full stop. There is no excuse for it ever. I've had lots and lots of subordinates, females and males and everything in between. And never have I treated anybody differently than anybody else simply because of their gender or their race or their preferences or their looks or anything else or culture. So that type of behavior is not tolerated. What I find so interesting here is that, especially now in this hyper sense of awareness that we have, trying to treat people fairly, and especially in the Department of Defense with all these moves, they knew about these allegations in 2019, right? And in 2020 and in 2021, the question is, why did it take an IG investigation from me, a request to investigate several, by the way, complaints, in order for finally this to be the tipping point and get somebody like that out of a position of authority? Let alone the fact that he made my life and my family's life miserable. You're absolutely right. He threatened me. He was going to tell people that I was crazy. He tried to go after my security clearance. He tried to have a Air Force OSI investigation, full field counterintelligence, by the way, criminal investigation, unauthorized disclosure investigation launched against me. Ironically enough, it turns out the very thing he was accusing me of an unauthorized disclosure, turns out he himself was guilty of, right? Using his personal computer to conduct government business and provide controlled but unclassified information, in an unauthorized manner. So this is the problem that I see in government, and I've tried to leave breadcrumbs along the way. I've told people that people will be held accountable. Of course, people said, yeah, whatever, Lou. Hey man, I'm serious. If anybody knows the kind of guy I am, I don't say things frivolously. Very deliberate. And by the way, we're not done yet with this effort to try to root out people who aren't supposed to be in those positions. Interestingly enough, the DoD is still making. I'd say DoD elements within the Department of Defense are still making bad decisions. You have people now that are in places of authority that they themselves are also subjects of IG investigations. So this is problematic. I'm not saying that just because you're the subject of an IG investigation that you should lose everything, because it turns out you could be innocent. But in this particular case, the IG said he wasn't, right? And he even admitted, yeah, I've done some things wrong. Well, okay, right there's, that should be closed case, but it wasn't, and was allowed to continue to fester. And people I know personally, people who had to resign, people who were put in a position to retire early just because they couldn't work with this guy, because he wasn't good. He wasn't good for the organization. He wasn't good for the American people. His behavior, for some reason, he felt that he could get away with what he was doing, and that's problematic, Ryan, because that erodes the very foundation, the very ethos of serving the American interest and serving the American public, which is what we've sworn to uphold, right, in the Constitution when we decide to serve our country. He made my life hell for 4 years. It was interesting because it was only after Mattis left did he turn around and start trying to get the PAO to change their public opinion on me and say, well, Lou, actually it had nothing to do with UFOs, which we know, of course, it did. Lou wasn't part of it. He had nothing to do with it. Of course, I did. And then they try to split hairs. Well, he had no assigned responsibilities under the USDI. Well, that's we've said that before 1,000 times. If you look at the memos going back to 2009, it was Congress who asked me to be part of it. My chain of command, higher than Reid, up at the Secretary of Defense level, knew very well what I was doing, and I was briefing him on a weekly basis. So it was problematic. I remember after the investigation that was conducted by Air Force OSI, I believe it concluded in 2019 and then referred back to Garry Reid. He was not happy with the results. He wanted an investigation to continue. And it was explained to me that a conversation occurred where someone in Air Force OSI said, "Sir, this would be the first time in the history of this institution where we have opened an investigation on a lack of evidence." And so he wasn't very happy about that. Then I get a call from DCSA, Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. DCSA, they're responsible for doing our background investigations and whatnot. And about a year later, they said, "Well, we're investigating your security clearance because of a unauthorized disclosure involving videos." So, okay, here we go again. So now you're telling me double jeopardy. Someone has launched yet another investigation for the same thing that I was already cleared for. I can only guess where that's coming from. So I had to get a lawyer involved, and I had to wind up being very direct and frank with DCSA and say, "Look, you're borderline harassing. Be very careful now, because I know a lot of the policies that you're following, I actually helped write some time ago. So I know the left and right limits. You're putting me in a situation of double jeopardy, and it's not right and it's not fair." Now, could I have come out publicly and said all this 2 years ago? Sure, I could have. But I always said I have to let the system work. I think people are now beginning to see, hopefully, that when I say something, I mean. I could have come out and defended myself 2 years ago on this topic, but I deliberately chose not to. And I did that because I wanted to give an opportunity for the system to work. As I have said before, we've got to let the system try to do what it's designed to do. We've got to get the IG enough opportunity, give the IG enough opportunity to do their job correctly, right? And I have faith and confidence in that. Now, someone could come back and say, "Well, IG already investigated them and they did nothing." Well, it's not up to IG to do something. It's up to the chain of command to do something. So if there is fault here and blame to be laid at the feet of anyone, it's those who are responsible for supervising that individual, Garry Reid, because they should have looked at that report and say, "Okay, this is nonsense. We have a problem here. We have somebody who is putting people into vulnerable situations." And by the way, let's go into that discussion for a second. Think about this for a second, Ryan. The head of DoD worldwide counterintelligence, worldwide, there are indicators of somebody who may be committing espionage or somebody who is susceptible to foreign intelligence services, right? Somebody who could be leveraged by them. Someone who's having an extramarital affair, one right there. Somebody who's having excessive foreign travel and doing things that they shouldn't, two. Now you've opened yourself up to blackmail. So here is somebody who himself was a counterintelligence vulnerability for the entire Department of Defense, had the keys to the kingdom, and was allowed to continue to this behavior for, think about this, years, plural, years. Had this been you, had this been me or anybody else, we would have been immediately removed of our position, investigated, and put on administrative leave, and then ultimately terminated.
This dysfunction really discourages me because, a lack of UAP transparency from the government is a sore spot for me. So seeing this saga having unfolded over multiple years, when in all reality, it appears very clear and unambiguous that Garry Reid should have been fired a long time ago, it discourages me because now I'm thinking, if this kind of dysfunction is so rooted within the U.S. government, how can I possibly expect that those that the U.S. Congress and the American people have asked to be transparent on UAP, those that are being asked to do that, how can I expect them to do that when my very own government lets a guy like Garry Reid run rampant? He's a risk for intelligence gathering from foreign governments. If I was to talk to anyone high up in the government, I'd be, "Look, don't worry about Elizondo. That guy you don't have to worry about him. He's solid. Worry about Garry Reid." But the question I want to ask you is, how much has his removal, what do you assess, like with his removal, do you assess that will increase UAP transparency? And the second part of that question is, did Garry Reid play a role in replacing the head of the UAP with someone of a lower ranking? I think that happened a couple of years ago. And further, was he against UFO transparency based on his personal philosophy, or was it exclusively his vendetta against you that triggered his desire to have zero UFO transparency and allowing the American public to have a clear picture at how interested the Pentagon actually was in this issue?
Woo. Again, great questions. Let me start, if I can, from the beginning. You asked me, did it have something to do with the removal of the first UAP task force commander? The answer is absolutely yes, unequivocally. By the way, and I have to respect this person's opinion, just like I did with Jim Lukatsky until he decided to come out publicly. The individual who ran the UAP task force, the very first UAP task force director or commander, was my deputy when I was running ATIP. He was the deputy at ATIP. Okay, so there was some continuity there. There was a whisper campaign and some other efforts underway where Garry Reid was not helpful and really made things complicated and difficult for my former colleague to succeed. And unfortunately, and subsequently, he wound up having to leave that position as the first ever UAP task force director, because Garry Reid was working behind channels, trying to make his life miserable within the Navy, trying to make his life miserable on the OSD staff and USDI. He had put a couple people and worked with a couple people to try to minimize the discussion and the topic, which, by the way, some of those people are still there. So let me get to the other part I wanted to say, Ryan. I'm not done yet. Okay, Garry Reid is the first domino to fall. There's others, and those individuals are going to be held accountable too. And why should we try? I know you're discouraged with our government, maybe some of the institutions that we have in there, but let me give you some hope here and some optimism. The reason why we are going to succeed is because you have people fighting for you. We have people fighting for UAP transparency who want to do the right thing. Fortunately, there's more of us than there are of the other folks that don't want transparency, and the good guys are winning. So that's the good news. And we're not gonna let this go. Now, there's a right way and wrong way to do things, and let me be very clear here. This isn't just about opening up Pandora's box. You go, boing, surprise, here you go. Here's all the data, UFO stuff. We have to unravel this ball of yarn of 70 years, tangled 70-year ball of yarn, and possibly more, in a very careful way. Okay, we're not trying to villainize anybody. We don't want to get anybody in trouble. What we simply want to do is say, okay, let bygones be bygones. Whatever happened in the past, happened in the past. Let's start now. Let's start fresh conversation with the American people on this topic. Let's be honest. Let's be forthcoming. We don't need to reveal sources and methods. We don't need to reveal nations' secrets, but we do have to acknowledge the reality of this and at least try to make correct what was made incorrect in the past. Basically rectify those sins, if you will, that were committed in the name of national security, which, by the way, I don't disagree, were actually made in honest efforts to protect national security at the time. So we're not trying to villainize anybody. What we're trying to do is get everybody to come to the table and say, look, folks, these are different times. The time has come to have the conversation with the American people, with the world, about a very serious topic that affects us all. And unfortunately, the longer you keep a lid on it, the more this is going to wind up really messy for everybody. So if you really are a patriot, you really want to do the right thing, now's the time to have the conversation. And so that's what we're doing. As far as the individual Garry Reid, again, he represents a much bigger problem in the department. There are people who will turn a blind eye just because of somebody's rank, because someone's passed, and give them a pass, give them a slide. And they don't realize that it erodes the very morale of the entire organization. It's a poison, it's a cancer, and that cancer spreads. And ultimately, the last people to ever know is usually leadership, which is ironic here. But that's the way it usually is, because nobody wants to tell the king or queen that they have no clothes on, right? So, oh, that looks great. Oh, no, everything's fine. Well, that's wrong. And this is why I've said before publicly, look, if people don't come correct, I will hold them accountable. And whether I have to do it on national news outlets, media outlets in front of 40 million people, or I do it in the halls of Congress, I will continue to fight. Hopefully that doesn't get me, on someone's naughty list where, maybe I'm I'm worth more, you know, on the other side, I'm worth more to them dead than alive. I hope that's not the case. But, you know, so be it if it is. I'm willing to take that chance because I took an oath, and that oath means everything to me. I went to war a few times for it. So I've got no problem calling out the bureaucracy.
We've all heard of the UFO commentary from people like Martin Heinrich of Nevada, Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, and even the current administrator, Bill Nelson, who I think was on the Armed Services Committee as a senator, like in 2019, and he was briefed on UAP too. So we have this theme that so many high-level officials are conveying to the American public, that UAP are beyond next generation technology of unknown origin, and even in addition to that, they're doing incursions into highly restricted military airspace with impunity. We've even heard this from the former CIA director. We've heard this from John Ratcliffe, former director of national intelligence. I mean, this theme is rock solid. So my question is, what exactly are these congressional committees seeing in their classified briefings? Because there are people who have this theory that it's all they're hearing is witness testimony. There's no high fidelity data. There's no radar return. There's no longer videos, higher resolution videos. It's just this mind virus that has infected the American government from people like Robert Bigelow and George Knapp. And it's just, and just think of how ridiculous that is. If that is true, and I wonder what kind of cascades of errors would have to manifest for that to actually occur and how plausible that actually is. But if that is true, imagine how embarrassing that would be for the American government. Oh, what we're really dealing with is Chinese drones. But for the past 4 years, our high-level government officials are telling us there's something out there and we don't know. If I was a Chinese high-level official, I'd be like, I'm loving this, man. This is some great stuff right here. I would love every bit of it. So this, like, what are they seeing in those briefings that are leading to all this legislation and all this commentary?
Yeah, it's, first of all, it's not mass hysteria, I can assure you. Our Senator Gillibrand, Senator Rubio, and others, Congressman Tim Burchett, Gallegos, these people aren't fools. They are highly, highly intelligent people. And believe you me, they're not going to put their political careers or butts on the line for hearsay. These people are very, very intelligent human beings. And they're also very courageous for doing what they're doing. But what are they seeing and what they're hearing is very compelling. They are getting, in some cases, certainly their staff, I know that to be a fact, are receiving high definition videos and photographs of things taken from some very sensitive platforms. On a weekly basis, we're getting new information. This week alone, we have two more very interesting incidents coming out of two different opposite AORs, areas of operation or areas of responsibility. So they're getting a lot of information is coming in fast and furious. The problem is it's still not coming in the way it should. It's still coming in bits and pieces. It's not coming in yet. You know, you think about building plumbing inside of a building, right? And you construct the pipes to deliver the hot water and the cold water whenever you want. Well, the pipe work isn't yet complete. So some spigots work better than others. Sometimes you have to go to the bathroom upstairs if you want to get hot water. You got to go into the kitchen if you want to use cold water. So the flow of information, in this case, not water, but information, that pipe work hasn't been completed yet. It's still being built right now. And there's still some people trying to figure out blueprints, you know, which pipes go where and why and how. But they are getting information. And they're getting it by organizations who control these particular capabilities and platforms. They're also getting the testimony from eyewitness testimony, in some cases from the pilots themselves who actually engaged it. They're seeing the reporting and telemetry data that comes in from the executive branch, from the various disparate organizations. Because let's give you a case in point. Let's just say this is the UFO somewhere, UAP. It's not just that you have, let's say, an F-18 pilot from the Navy filming this thing. There could also be radar data from the local Air Force base that's picking up that. And then it just happens to be that there is a weather satellite that's looking at certain atmospheric conditions up above from NOAA that's picking something up. And oh, by the way, FAA air traffic control in Minneapolis is picking something up, right? And by the way, I say Minneapolis, I don't mean just an example. People are going to say, oh, an event happened in Minneapolis. It's just caveating. You could say, anywhere, Walla Walla, Washington. And so that's what builds that layers of, that crosshatch of information that allows you then to paint a much more compelling picture and then provide the report up to individuals who have a need to know and who have a security clearance. The good thing about the SISI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Armed Services Committee, and then you have the House versions of that, the HPSI and the HASC. Those people are cleared. They have security clearances at the TS level, and they can be privy to that information. So they can be briefed to that information. In fact, they do have an inherent need to know, especially the oversight committees, like I just mentioned. So it's working. And no, these people aren't just getting anecdotal information. It's not mass hysteria. It's not, that we have deluded ourselves into thinking air trash or air junk or space junk is a UAP. That's somebody who's never had one of the briefings saying that.
In June of 2020, Chris Mellon posted the following tweet. Regarding the requirement for the intelligence oversight committees to be notified in writing of major intelligence failures, the answer is no. They were not notified. Indeed, they were kept in the dark about the UAP issue for years, and we're not happy to first see it in the New York Times. And so to add on to that, I mean, it's common sense. I mean, billions of dollars go into these sensor data collecting mechanisms, and I'm just going to say it, on Jeremy Corbell talked about how and Jeremy Corbell knows Fravor. Jeremy Corbell has a network. I can't vouch for it, but I'll say what he said. He basically said that Commander Fravor's F-18 was rendered powerless. His weapons and radar systems were actively jammed by the UFO. This is considered an act of war by our DOD, and the situation was handled accordingly. PJ Hughes talked about radio frequencies being picked up by the E-2 Hawkeye from the Tic Tac. Fravor has gone on the record publicly saying he saw the radar tape himself. That's high fidelity scientific evidence. And on top of that all, we hear about 2014-15 with Ryan Graves and Danny Acoin. These objects were measured with multiple sensors. They could do hypersonic velocity. They could stop on a dime. They could hover like a helicopter, but also moments later do hypersonic velocity. And furthermore, like Ryan Graves was talking about how, these things would be out there for 12 hours, 11 hours more than they should be capable of based upon the energy they would require to do what they're doing. So U.S. government, don't you dare tell me you don't have the data, because it seems pretty obvious you do. So here's my question, because I'm scratching my head. How is it possible anyone could possibly muster the argument that the law was not broken by not giving congressional oversight committees in writing the intelligence failure of, you know what, I'm sorry, but there's technology out there that is like 1,000,000 times better than ours, and we don't know where it comes from. How is that not an intelligence failure? And if it is an intelligence failure, why was that not given to the United States Congress in writing?
Ryan, you could not be more accurate, and you are absolutely entitled to your frustration. Welcome to my world. It is egregious. It is unacceptable, and I have said this before. I'm the kind of cat you don't want in Congress, because I'm the kind of cat will haul every single one of these people up by their neckties, sit them in front of a desk and say, you now owe the American people an explanation. You will do that. And you will also, if you don't give me a good enough answer, you're fired here and now. This is perhaps the greatest intelligence failure this country has seen, because no matter whose technology it is, we failed to report on it. It is a problem. We've known about it for a long time. Now, with that said, I do not hold the people who were actually in part of these efforts and running these perhaps even legacy efforts before ATIP responsible, because it's not their job to inform Congress. It's their boss's job to inform Congress and to inform the chain of command. So I want to make that clear. There's a delineation between the worker bees and those who are actually trying to do their patriotic mission and serve their country, and those individuals who obfuscated and decided this information is too secret, we can't tell anybody. Well, Chris has made a good point in the past. We won the Cold War not because we kept better secrets, but because we knew how to move information more efficiently and quickly within the U.S. government. There's a reason why 9/11 happened. 9/11 happened because there were organizations in the U.S. government that had different pieces of the puzzle, but none of them wanted to share the information. And so what happened? Well, you had the devastating effects of 9/11, which Some argue could have been quite preventable. People lost their lives, they died, right? So where is the accountability? Who got fired? Well, no one got fired, right? What we did is we created the IRTPA, Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. We created a DNI and later on a DHS and hoped that would never happen again. But we didn't really solve the problem yet. So this is a great point you make. It is exactly why I wake up every morning doing what I do until the problem's fixed. And by the way, it's not just UAP; it's other issues as well. There's some things that I'm sure American people would be very surprised to know. Some of the failures of bureaucracy. Again, I'm trying to keep focused on the bureaucracy itself, though, not on individuals right now. Those individuals are being held accountable. I do believe that the system is doing precisely what it needs to do. But there's still some games being played at the Pentagon. But that's okay because time is on our side and we're on the right side of history. We're on the right side of the narrative and we're going to continue to do what we do. That's my 2 cents or maybe 3 cents.
Okay. So for my last question, because we basically hit the point, but just for my last question, is it going to be necessary to have some deconflicting going on? Because I know you were involved at some point when you worked for the government in deconflicting programs that could possibly be doing the same thing. The last thing we want is the AOIMSG office to be doing exactly what secret UFO programs that haven't been brought to the surface have been doing for decades. I mean, that's just a waste of tax dollar money and it's ridiculous. You hear rumors, I don't know, maybe OSAP and ATIP are the only UFO programs and the guy from the 80s that you talked to during a meeting who told you that he did what you did. Maybe those are the only UFO programs ever in the history of the United States. I think that's bordering on implausible, but maybe it's true. But if it's not true, and if rumors like from people like Dr. Bernard Hayes, and also Corbell has also stated stuff like this before. I'll just give you a Dr. Bernard Hayes quote. Sources tell me that this is merely the tip of the iceberg. A group of 4 related but separate unacknowledged SCI programs tracing back to a 1947 Truman Memorandum still exists and were housed as of the 1990s in major aerospace companies such as Lockheed, TRW, Raytheon Aerospace Corp., etc. The programs collectively have budgets in the 10 billion range and up. Topics apparently include both reverse engineering and extraterrestrial biology. Look, I have no clue if there's any validity to that at all. But you know what? When OSAP was going on, when ATIP was going on, no one knew about it. The bigot list for ATIP was minuscule. No one knew about it. Other countries didn't know about it. Maybe their intelligence services did, but the public didn't know about it. So my concern is that AOMSG is going to come online. It's going to do what it's going to do. But you know what? We have decades of other programs who have gotten the exact same data that AOMSG is going to try to get. So how do we solve that problem if it is indeed, because it's only theoretical, but if it is indeed a problem?
Ryan, I'd go one step beyond that. I'm not sure it's so theoretical. I think you bring up a really good point, and we have an obligation to make sure that whatever lessons learned and insight was gained from any type of previous effort does need to come under the single umbrella. It needs to come under the single one tent, right? And so we're not wasting taxpayer money and time and reinventing the wheel, so to speak. I'm really glad you bring this up because it's really important. It's probably one of the top 5 most important things that we need to try to figure out within the government. It's funny, I've never been asked that question before like that. But it's certainly something. You want to ask me what keeps me up at night? That's one of the few things that really keeps me up at night. We have to do a better job. And when to do that, one of the options is maybe creating some sort of amnesty program where people can come in out of the dark and out of the cold and come under the tent, right? Have some hot coffee or tea and let's talk, and we'll continue to protect the information and protect you at the commensurate level, in an exchange with an understanding that, we're not going to hold you liable for anything. But then you put maybe a sunset clause and say, look, that's only good for a year and a half. Anybody that we find afterwards that was part of any type of legacy effort, and you don't come forward and talk to us because we now have the authority, then it's going to be a different conversation, right? Then it's going to be, okay, well, you had your chance and now you're going against the law because the law says A, B, C, and D, and you did X, Y, and Z, and therefore you are breaking the law. So, I have to be careful when I say we, I don't mean myself personally. What I mean is the institution, right? The government. But that's something that could certainly be considered. There's a lot of smart. The good news here, Ryan, I'll leave you with this. There's a lot of good people right now, smart people that are trying to figure this out. My only concern is that AOI MSG does not get sidetracked and consider this some sort of air trash or space junk problem. And in 4 years, okay, well, we've answered the mail and space junk, so therefore AOI MSG goes away. That's not the intent of Congress. And if they think it is, then we're going to be right back to square one again, having to hold people accountable. Just look over there what just happened to that dude. Don't be that guy. You don't have to. Please don't do that, because that's not the direction we want to go down. So that would be my recommendation. I also want to take just a moment here, Ryan, and thank you sincerely. There's a lot of people on the inside that actually watch very carefully what you say. Over the listen, no BS, man. Hey, over the last 4 years, some of your predictions, it's funny because, you say, well, I think this is going to happen. And no kidding, like 2 days earlier, there's a conversation occurring where that was discussed almost to a T. And you got a couple of our guys scratching their heads saying, does the guy actually work with us or something? is he on the payroll? How the hell does he know this? So
I can give them my address and we can facilitate that.
Well, I just want to say thanks for everything you're doing. I know you catch a lot of shit out there, like the rest of us, but you're doing a phenomenal job, and I want to thank you. And you have, again, maybe at some point, some of those people will come out of the shadows, but I think you'd be really surprised and quite tickled if you knew who actually follows you.
Well, I appreciate it, Lou, and thank you for coming on the show. And I think I speak for a lot of people that I really appreciate the service you did in your long career in government and what you continue to do now. And we'll just call it a day. Thank you so much.
Ryan, my honor and pleasure. Anytime, buddy. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.